What if everything you think you know about the royal family is built on silence? What if a single sentence, quietly released, carefully worded, and almost ignored, triggered one of the most disturbing storms the monarchy has faced in years? And what if the people most affected by it all weren't powerful royals, but two children who never asked to be part of the fight? Because today, something happened. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Not the way the headlines are screaming it happened. Not the way social media wants you to believe. But quietly, deliberately, and with consequences that are still unfolding. This morning, royal watchers woke up to a flood of notifications. Trending headlines, explosive claims, viral videos, comment sections on fire. Some said King Charles had confirmed devastating news. Others claimed royal titles were stripped. And the most shocking allegation of all spread like wildfire before anyone could stop it. That Archie Harrison and Lilibet Diana were no longer recognized as royal children at all. Pause. Let that sink in. Two children, names known around the world before they could speak, dragged into a narrative so severe, so emotionally charged, that even seasoned royal correspondents hesitated before repeating it. But here's the question no one slowed down long enough to ask. What actually happened today? Not what people assumed. Not what influencers interpreted. Not what the algorithm rewarded. What was actually said? Because there's a dangerous gap between confirmation and conclusion. And once that gap fills with speculation, it becomes almost impossible to empty again. Especially when it involves the British monarchy. Especially when it involves Prince Harry. Especially when it involves Meghan Markle. And especially when it involves children. The monarchy doesn't operate like normal institutions. It doesn't clarify quickly. It doesn't respond emotionally. And it certainly doesn't rush to correct public misunderstanding unless absolutely necessary. Silence is not a mistake. It is a strategy. But sometimes, silence creates a vacuum. And vacuums get filled. Today, that vacuum was filled with whispers that became headlines. Headlines that became declarations. Declarations that became outrage. And somewhere between the palace gates and your screen, a story transformed into something far darker than what was actually on paper. So let's slow this down. Let's rewind. Let's talk about how this moment began, why it matters now, and why it has shaken people far beyond royal fandom. Because whether you support the monarchy or not, this story isn't just about crowns and titles. It's about trust. It's about power. It's about how quickly a narrative can harden into belief. And it's about how children become symbols in adult wars. This isn't the first time the royal family has faced rumors about legitimacy. History is full of them. But never before has the internet accelerated those rumors at this speed, with this level of emotional intensity, and with such little pause for verification. Today's outrage didn't come from a dramatic press conference. There were no flashing cameras, no emergency announcements. Instead, it came from something far more dangerous. Interpretation. A carefully worded palace communication was released. Routine on the surface, administrative in tone. And yet, within hours, it was being framed as confirmation of something devastating. People began saying the king had spoken, that the truth was out, that the monarchy had finally acted. But when you look closely, when you strip away the emotion and read what was actually released, something uncomfortable becomes clear. What people heard may not be what was said. And that distinction matters. Because when a story reaches this level of intensity, correction becomes almost impossible, even if facts eventually surface, even if clarifications are made. Why? Because outrage moves faster than truth. And belief, once formed, resists contradiction. Ask yourself something. How many times have you seen a headline and reacted before reading the details? How many times have you shared something because it felt true, not because it was confirmed? Now imagine that pressure multiplied by royal history, family betrayal narratives, and years of unresolved tension between Harry and the institution he left behind. That's the emotional powder keg this story landed in. To some, this moment felt like vindication. To others, it felt like cruelty. And to many, it felt deeply unsettling. Because no matter where you stand on Harry and Meghan, there is one uncomfortable truth. Children are being talked about like political chess pieces. And that alone should give us pause. But the internet doesn't pause. It accelerates. Influencers rush to interpret. Commentators rushed to declare, and audiences rushed to pick sides. Some said the monarchy was finally drawing a line. Others said this proved everything Harry had warned about. Still others claimed the entire situation exposed hypocrisy at the heart of the crown. But here's the thing. The monarchy rarely draws lines loudly. It prefers blurred edges, ambiguity, plausible deniability, which raises an unsettling question. If today wasn't meant to be explosive, why wasn't it clarified? And if it was meant to send a message, who was that message really for? Prince Harry? The British public? The Commonwealth? Or history itself? Because King Charles occupies an impossible position. He is a father. He is a monarch. He is a symbol of continuity. Every word attached to his name carries weight. Every silence creates interpretation. And today, interpretation ran wild. But before we decide what today means, we need to understand how royal communication works. We need to understand how easily a phrase can be weaponized. And we need to understand how quickly children can become collateral damage in narratives they never consented to. This story did not begin today. It has been building for years. From the moment Prince Harry stepped back from royal duties, from the interviews that followed, from the memoir that reignited wounds many thought were already open. Each chapter added tension. Each silence added speculation. And today, that tension snapped into something new, something heavier, something that felt final. Or at least, final enough for people to believe it was. But belief is not the same as confirmation. And that difference is where this story lives. So in this series, we are going to do something most reactions today did not. We are going to slow down. We are going to separate what was said from what was assumed. What was confirmed from what was implied. What is legally possible from what is emotionally believed. We are going to examine how a statement turned into a scandal. How rumors become truth when repeated often enough, and how the monarchy's greatest strength, its silence, can sometimes become its greatest weakness. By the end of this story, you may still feel unsettled. You may still feel angry. You may still feel protective, but you will understand something far more important. How narratives are born, and how easily they can spiral out of control. Because what came next after that initial statement wasn't outrage. It was amplification. And once the media machine kicked in, there was no turning back. But what sparked it all wasn't a speech. It wasn't a declaration. It was a few carefully chosen words that most people didn't even read for themselves. What if the most explosive royal story of the year didn't begin with a shout, but with a whisper? Because that's exactly how this started. Not with King Charles standing at a podium. Not with palace aides rushing journalists into a briefing room. Not with a dramatic announcement read aloud to the world. It began quietly. Almost invisibly, a routine palace communication, the kind that usually passes unnoticed except by the most dedicated royal watchers, the kind that, on most days, barely earns a headline. And yet, within hours, it was being described as confirmation. Within minutes, it was being labeled devastating. And by the end of the day, many people were convinced they had just witnessed one of the most shocking moments in modern royal history. So let's rewind. Strip away the emotion. Strip away the commentary. Strip away the viral captions and dramatic thumbnails. What was actually released? The statement itself was restrained, carefully constructed, almost painfully neutral. No dramatic language. No accusations. No mention of legitimacy, DNA, or denial. In fact, at first glance, it didn't seem connected to Archie Harrison or Lilibet Diana at all. And that's the first contradiction. If this statement was truly meant to confirm something so monumental, why was it written like administrative housekeeping? Why was it buried among updates about protocol, representation, and titles more broadly? Why did it require interpretation to become explosive? This is where things get uncomfortable. Because the palace didn't say what people wanted it to say, but it also didn't say what people needed it to say. And in that gap, speculation rushed in. The statement referenced royal titles. It referenced eligibility. It referenced formal recognition under specific conditions. Dry words, legal words, institutional words. But when filtered through years of tension, unresolved resentment, and online echo chambers, those words took on a life of their own. Here's what many people heard. They heard that the king had drawn a line. They heard that something had finally been corrected. They heard that the monarchy had acted. But here's what the statement did not contain. No mention of Prince Harry's children by name. No declaration about their parentage. No announcement of titles being stripped. No confirmation of any allegation circulating online. That's not opinion. That's absence. So how did absence turn into certainty? Because people don't read statements. They read reactions. Within minutes, commentators began posting translations. This really means. What they're not saying is. This confirms what we've suspected. And once those interpretations started circulating, the original text became irrelevant. Ask yourself this. When was the last time you saw a palace statement go viral on its own words? It almost never happens. What goes viral is interpretation, tone, emotion, outrage. And today, outrage found fertile ground. Because the idea that the monarchy would quietly correct something so fundamental taps into something deep. Distrust, suspicion, a sense that truths are hidden behind protocol. So people leaned into that feeling. They filled the silence with assumptions. Some accounts claimed sources had confirmed more than what was written. Others insisted the palace was deliberately vague to avoid legal consequences. A few went even further, declaring this was the beginning of a full removal of status. But when pressed for evidence, those claims always traced back to the same place. Interpretation of that original statement. Not a follow-up, not a clarification, not a second release, just interpretation. And yet, here's where the palace's silence becomes critical. Because the monarchy knows exactly how its words are read. It understands media dynamics better than almost any institution on earth. So the question becomes unavoidable. If this interpretation was wrong, why not correct it? Why allow a narrative involving children to spiral out of control? This is where royal communication gets dangerous. Sometimes, silence is used to avoid giving oxygen to rumors. Sometimes, responding only validates speculation. But sometimes, silence allows misinformation to harden. And today, misinformation didn't just harden. It crystallized. By midday, headlines no longer said interpreted. They said confirmed. By evening, social media posts no longer said alleged. They said proven. And by night, the story had grown teeth. People weren't asking if it was true. They were arguing about whether it was justified. That's how fast belief forms. But here's the most unsettling part. Even among journalists, confusion spread. Some admitted privately they couldn't find confirmation beyond the statement itself. Others said they were waiting for clarification that never came. A few noted that palace language had been misread before, with consequences that lasted years. And yet, no correction arrived. No denial. No expansion. No clarification. Just nothing. And nothing is never neutral in royal storytelling. So let's talk about that silence. Because silence doesn't always mean agreement. But it also doesn't mean objection. Silence, in the monarchy, often means strategy. The palace may have calculated that the storm would pass, that interest would burn out, that tomorrow's headlines would move on. But there was a problem with that assumption. This story touched children. And stories involving children don't burn out quickly. They provoke instinct, protection, anger. And once those emotions are triggered, logic struggles to catch up. Some people saw this moment as overdue accountability. Others saw it as institutional cruelty. Many saw it as proof that nothing had changed since Harry left. But almost no one stopped to ask the most basic question. Is what we're reacting to actually what was said? And that's the danger of modern outrage. It doesn't require confirmation. It requires momentum. So while the palace remained silent, the internet filled in the blanks. And those blanks grew darker by the hour. Suddenly, people were discussing hypothetical consequences as if they were reality. Titles gone. Status erased. History rewritten. But here's the contradiction no one wanted to address. If something this severe had actually happened, it would not be buried in a routine update. It would be announced, documented, recorded. The monarchy thrives on record. And yet, no record was produced. Which raises another uncomfortable question. What if today's outrage isn't about what the palace did, but about what people were already ready to believe? What if this story exploded not because of new information, but because it fit an existing narrative? A narrative of betrayal, a narrative of punishment, a narrative of family conflict that never truly healed. Because when people already expect something, they don't need much evidence to accept it. They just need a trigger. And today, that trigger was a statement that most people never read in full. They read the headline. They watched the reaction video. They scrolled the comment section, and belief took root. But belief without confirmation is fragile. It needs reinforcement, and that reinforcement came fast. Clips, quotes, sources close to the palace. None named, none verified. Just enough to keep the fire burning. And through it all, two names kept appearing. Archie Harrison, Lilibet Diana. Names that should never be part of speculative outrage. Names that belong to children growing up far from palace walls. And yet, here they were, at the center of a storm they didn't create.